You are tired of average. You want more out of life. You know you're capable of something greater. This show will help you become resilient in your home, at work, and in your community. Welcome to the Resilient Humans Podcast with your host, Kevin Wood. All right, welcome back to the Resilient Humans Podcast. And today's guest is someone who doesn't just talk about trust, he teaches people how to build it. Dr. Darryl Stickel is one of the world's leading experts on trust. And in his experience, Darryl has advised top-level leaders, spoken at institutions like Harvard and NYU, and coached teams through cultural transformations grounded in trust and resilience. But what makes Darryl stand out is that he's not just diagnosing the problem. He's offering a practical, actionable model on how to create trust in relationships, leadership, and organizations. So whether you're a parent, a business owner, or a team member trying to rebuild connection, Darryl's work can show you how that trust isn't some mysterious quality, and it's a skill. And today he's going to break it down for us. So Darryl, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right on. So I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off because I want to know what inspired you to dedicate your career to trust. And if there was part two, I guess, is there a moment or an experience that lit that fire for you?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in northern British Columbia in Fort St. John. And it's a small community, kind of remote, harsh conditions. And there was just a sense there that if you could help someone, you should. You know, we had to pull together to survive. And that experience just taught me to try to be a helpful person, gave me a level of empathy. Then when I was 17, I was playing junior hockey and I got jumped by a fan with a club. Shattered my helmet, knocked me unconscious. According to a teammate, I stopped breathing 3 times on the way to the hospital in the ambulance. And I knew at the time that I was going legally blind. You know, I had a hereditary retinal disorder. My plan had been to think for a living. And now all of a sudden I couldn't think. I had the attention span of a fruit fly. And it led to some real challenges, feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. And it provoked a sense of empathy in me that was even more pronounced, an understanding for people who are struggling. And then, you know, I have my own struggles, my own challenges for a couple of years, and then I find myself in Victoria trying to go to school and at the University of Victoria, and I would find myself sitting on a bus or at a bus stop or somewhere in public, and strangers would sit next to me and say, "I'm really having a hard time." And I wanted to understand what it was that was driving that, what was causing people to trust me, to connect with me. And so I started working on crisis lines and with families in crisis and troubled teens and street kids, and trying to hone those skills, but also trying to figure out what it was that made me different. And I started doing a master's degree in public administration. I was working in native land claims in British Columbia. And they would ask me these sort of deep philosophical questions like, what is self-government? Or what will the province look like 50 years after claims are settled? And the last question they asked me, Kevin, was, how do we convince a group of people we've shafted for over 100 years they should trust us? Mm. I thought, man, that's a good question. It made me think about these sort of long-term disputes, right? The ones that just seem so resilient, like they last way longer than they should and don't seem to benefit anyone. Why are they so hard for us to solve? And so I went to Duke and wrote my doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments. And it turned out that I had, because of my background, had a perspective that most didn't. I ended up with a couple of really well-regarded academics on the topic They were considered leading experts on my committee. And they sat me down after I finished and they said, look, when you first came to us with this topic, we thought too big, too complicated. He never solves it. We'll give him 6 months. He'll come crawling back. We'll let him chisel off a little piece of this, and that'll be his thesis. I said, 6 months in, you were so far beyond us, we couldn't help anymore. And now we're here 2 years later. We think you've solved it. And so I left academia, went into the real world, worked as a consultant for a bit for McKinsey and Company. And they said, well, you got great client hands. We're going to send you to the worst places possible. And so I would find myself working in places with labor disputes or hostile takeovers or things of that nature and building relationships with clients, actually applying the model that I'd developed. And then 2001, I was involved in a car accident and ended up with a traumatic brain injury. Couldn't work 80 hours a week anymore. So I started my own little company called Trust Unlimited, and I've devoted the rest of my career to helping people better understand what trust is, how it works, and most importantly, how to build it.
So what is your definition of trust? How would you describe it, and how is it different from what most people assume it is?
So trust is the willingness to be vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. And the place where I differ, there's a few places where my model differs, because I then take that definition and say, okay, so there's elements of uncertainty and vulnerability embedded in that definition. And 95% of the trust research focuses on uncertainty. And so it doesn't include vulnerability, which means that we treat trust like it's either present or absent. And that's where our heads go too, Kevin. Like if I ask you or your audience, who do you trust? You'll take a moment and you'll think about it, and you'll think about deep personal relationships. You'll think about siblings, parents, spouse, your very best friends. And the reality is that we trust people all the time, right? We trust some people more than others. You go to a restaurant, you believe that the waiter's not spitting in your food and that it hasn't been dropped 6 times on the way to the table. And, it's what allows society to function. And so when we include that vulnerability piece, I think of it as uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk. And we each have a threshold of risk that we can tolerate. And so if we go beyond that threshold, we don't trust. If we're beneath it, then we do. And so that means that if uncertainty is really high, then we can only tolerate a small range of vulnerability and still fit beneath that threshold. And in our deeper relationships, that uncertainty gets compressed to a really small amount so that there's a really broad range of vulnerability we can tolerate with the other person. And so that model allows us to understand really simply how to build trust. It's where does uncertainty come from? How do I take steps to reduce it? Where does vulnerability come from? How do I take steps to help you manage it? And we can be systematic and intentional about building better relationships with other folks.
I love that you include the vulnerability aspect to it. I've interviewed, a lot of people on this podcast, and I always ask them what their definition of resiliency is. And I hear, so I didn't really have a definition prior to starting this. I had an idea, but not like a working definition. And so half the people say, through adversity, do hard things. And it's a very hard aspect to it. And then the other half talk about the soft part of resiliency, and that is compassion and vulnerability and the soft side of it. And so it's good that you're hitting both sides of it. It's not forced, but it does need to be intentional. And I know you've said before that trust is built intentionally. So what's the first step somebody could take if they wanted to improve that trust in a key relationship or any relationship for that matter?
So a lot of times I think that there are 10 levers that we can pull to build trust. And those of us who aren't very good at building trust have a lever that we pull, right? Usually it's the ability lever, right? Like I can say, I got a PhD from Duke and I spoke at Harvard and, I've been nominated as one of the world's thought leaders on trust. Most of your audience probably doesn't give a crap, right? They want to know if I can explain how they can fix a relationship that they're struggling with.
Yep.
That's what good looks like to them. And can I explain it in a way that actually makes sense to them? And so a lot of times what I do is I'll walk people through the different levers, because those who are a bit better at building trust have multiple levers that they can pull. And those who are really good have multiple levers and they know when to pull which one. And so uncertainty comes to us, from me as an individual, and from the context I'm embedded in. And so there are 4 levers within uncertainty that we can pull. 3 of those come from us as individuals, and this is where the overwhelming majority of the trust research resides. And that's benevolence. Do I have your best interest at heart? Integrity. Do I follow through on my promises and do my actions line up with my values? And ability. Do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? And then the 4th lever is the context, the rules of the game, the formal and informal mechanisms of social control. Because if I can explain to you how I'm constrained, it actually makes it easier for you to predict my behavior, right? And the context, it helps us understand why you go to a doctor's office and they say, take off your clothes, and you do.
Right. If your electrician said that would be a little different story, right?
Exactly, right? Like I've tried that in other places. It doesn't work,
Yeah.
right? And even if I say, no, I'm a doctor, I'm just not that kind of doctor. And so we can learn how to reduce people's uncertainty. We can learn to understand their vulnerability. And one of the best ways for us, I'm working on a project right now to try to help young men thrive, because they're in such dire straits. The research and data is pretty horrifying. The best way to get men to accept help is to ask them for help first.
Mm.
And so it's a small dose of vulnerability. I make myself a little bit vulnerable to you. You feel like it's okay to reciprocate, to respond in kind, to make yourself a bit vulnerable to me.
Just like cracking a door open, right? Just a little bit to let that in.
Showing them it's okay.
Yeah.
And it's important that we share, don't scare, right? Too much too fast will frighten people off. They'll look at it and go, I'm not ready to carry that burden for you. And I'm also not willing to respond yet at that level. And so small doses of vulnerability followed up with, I like to follow with benevolence, right? Trying to do something in someone's best interest. And the challenge we find, and this is something your audience can practice, is a lot of times I'll talk to leaders and I'll say, benevolence, integrity, ability. They'll say, oh, I do all those things. And I'll say, says who, right? Because if I tell you I'm benevolent, you may be willing to hear that, but you don't believe it. It's more important that you believe I've got your best interest at heart. And so your audience can try this conversation out with someone in their family or one of their friends. I heard this guy, Darryl, he was talking about trust. He said that benevolence was a really big part of that. And really, it's just a fancy word that means you've got somebody's back. And I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that? And the other person's going to say yes, because we pretty much all of us have. And then you get curious, what did you try? How was it misinterpreted? What did they think you were trying to do? Then we narrow the funnel. We say, has someone ever really looked out for you? What did they do? How did it feel? And we get curious again, right? Now we're priming them to think about what benevolence means to them, what it looks like when someone's got their back, and we're getting hints. Then we narrow the funnel further and we say, what is success for you? How do I help you get there? What would it look like if I had your back? And now we've created a moment for transparency where we can actually later on say, you remember when you told me this is what success looked like for you? Mm. This is me trying to help you get there.
That's fascinating. The line of questioning that you just asked, because that's very similar to our interview process when people first join the gym. We have to build that level of trust. And that's one of the questions further down on our questionnaire or survey that we ask people is, what does success look like for you?
Yeah.
Because if we don't know what their North Star is, we can't give them the roadmap or help them to get there.
Right.
So it's a very important aspect to this trust building. It's not, we're trying to sell you our program. We're trying to make sure that our program aligns with what you want. And it's not always going to happen. That's okay. Like, there are other options, and it's okay if you go to those other options, and we'll recommend the best one for you. We want what's best for you, and it might not be us, and that's okay.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a powerful approach to engaging with customers and clients. The first real serious client I had was a mutual fund company. And part of the advice I gave to them was, the only strategic advantage you can have is building deep relationships with your customers. And that's going to mean you sit down with them and you try to help them sell to their customers, because their customers were financial advisors. They weren't schmoes like you and I trying to invest our meager earnings.
Yeah.
It was people trying to sell to us, right? And so I said, you're going to sit down with them and you're going to tell them, here's how you build a profile or a portfolio for a customer. And for each element of that portfolio, you should be able to go through and say, here are 5 options. And in this case, we're one of the best options. But in this case, we're not. And here's some of the ones I think are the best options for you. And, I really helped them change their mindset when I said, you're trying to go from 10% of somebody's portfolio to 11. Why not just instead say, I want to help you double the size of your portfolio, because 10% of twice as much is twice as much. And once they change that mindset to, we're about what's best for our clients were crawling all over themselves trying to invest them. After 18 months, they did a survey and found out that trust was the primary driver of the sales decision, and that they were dramatically more trusted than their competitors. And they generated 75 cents out of every new dollar that came into the industry for 2 years. Right. So,
yeah,
we see that take place often, right? Where when organizations build trust, when leaders build trust, they're profoundly successful. And it's one of the factors of success we actually have control over. Right? There's so much outside of your control. Right now, you're running a gym. The weather, the season, disposable income, all things that determine your success rates or have a huge impact on your ability to sell and be successful. All outside your control. What you do control is the relationships you build with your clients and with
absolutely.
your staff.
And it's discussions that we have quite often. How do we make people feel like they're a part of something bigger? That's
Right.
a big aspect to it. And we often talk about connections. How do we connect people with other people in the gym? So we had a girl actually yesterday, first class. She walked in. She goes, "Oh, I'm really nervous." And I go, "Oh, this is Darlene." I remember when she was nervous for her first class. Darlene, this is Rachel. And she goes, "Oh my God, really?" And like, boom, they hit it off. And she showed her everything and where to go and how to do things. I was like, boom, connection made, trust secured. I know she's going to have a great first class.
Absolutely. And that vulnerability that we experience by going to a gym, right? Because, imagine someone's got my best interest at heart and they see you and I sitting there having dinner together, and I'm about to tuck into this huge dessert, and they say, "Oh my God, Darryl, you're not going to eat that, are you?" And they don't realize that this body doesn't just happen, Kevin, right? Mistakes have been made. There's been a serious focus on a lack of exercise and bad decisions. And so, their intent falls flat. And the vulnerability I would experience in going to a gym, like, I'm legally blind, I go with my guide dog. I don't want to get in people's way. I don't want people judging me. If I have a lack of knowledge, I want it to be a safe place, right? I don't want some roided out 600-pound monster mocking me. And those are all the vulnerabilities we start to feel when we start thinking about going to a place like your gym.
Mm-hmm.
And getting there and finding people who are like us and who will welcome us and accept us, powerful, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a connection piece. And geez, if you brought a dog to the gym, everybody would be like, this is the best gym ever. So,
Yeah.
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 Um,
Well, my guide dog Drake is just so he loves people,
that's
right?
awesome.
He's got the
Yeah,
best brain chemistry ever.
there you go.
So, yeah.
So you kind of alluded to this in what you just mentioned, but what are some ways that people unintentionally erode trust, even if they think they are doing the right thing?
Yeah. So we like to pull the ability lever. Um, it can make people feel like we're talking down to them, like we're dismissing them, like we don't have their best interest at heart.
And is that like
Um,
pleading to authority, like using the letters after your name to say, look at what
yeah.
I've done, therefore you should listen to me?
Yeah. And so the reason I don't wander around saying I'm, Dr. Darryl Stickel is because I feel like it distances me from people.
Okay.
And I I'm Darryl, right? And I'm a guy who's just trying to be helpful. And I have come to peace with the fact that I have limitations, right? I have significant flaws. And when I'm out in the world, I need help often, right? And people are amazing, right? If I'm lost, all I got to do is stand still for a few minutes and people start coming up to me saying, "Where are you trying to go? How can I help
Right.
you?"
Yeah.
Um, and so we have a desire to connect and to be helpful. It's just short circuited by our fear, by our narrative, right? And so our lack of trust. And I explained the model to you: uncertainty times vulnerability equals risk. Trust levels are at the lowest we've ever measured. And it's because our vulnerability hasn't really gone down, but our uncertainty is bouncing all over the place. And so asking someone to be just a little more vulnerable feels like a bigger ask than it's ever been.
Why do you think that is?
We've seen a rapid change in norms and values.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen a rapid technological change. Um, we've short circuited a lot of the learning that we used to do. You talk about resilience. Partly resilience is a learned skill.
Yes.
And we become resilient by experiencing challenge. And now we've gone to a place where we minimize challenge. We provide all kinds of options. Our relationships are a mile wide and an inch deep because they aren't resilient, right? And so we avoid hard conversations because they're hard. Um, we try to minimize or eliminate conflict whenever we can. And I heard you on one of your podcasts talking about curiosity as one of the chapters for your book.
Yeah.
And I often talk about people being curious rather than judgmental,
Mm-hmm.
right? I believe X. Oh, how did you get there? What makes you think that? And you don't have to be judging someone else because of a choice that they've made or values that they have or norms that they have. But you can get curious and try to understand them more effectively. And if we give each other a little bit of grace, we get it back, right? And so, I've got my own story of resilience. And I think I've tried to prepare my sons to be resilient in the world, not by heaping hardship on them, but by teaching them how to build positive relationships with others.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about the plight of young men. I think partly it's they're not as resilient as we need them to be because they haven't learned the skills to build the relationships that would help them thrive and survive through challenge. And they don't have those skills. They don't have them innately anymore. When I grew up, I was able to be an idiot multiple times in a row. People were stuck with me, right? And So they would say, Darryl, you're being an idiot. And, I might get defensive depending on how they phrased it, but the message would eventually sink in. And I could learn those skills and start to figure out how to not be an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get that same opportunity in the same way anymore, right? You're an idiot once, you're branded for life. You need to change your name and move to a different country. There's so much fear. And, I've had a lot of folks recently talk to me about safety, about feeling safe. And if we think about it, safety can come to us from hiding, from not taking any risks, from never being vulnerable, for never exposing our true selves to folks, never having difficult conversations or putting ourselves in the way of challenge. Or safety can come from feeling like I've got the skills to handle this.
Right.
No matter what comes up.
Which one's going to lend to a better outcome in life?
That's the latter, right? Because now we can have experiences and be exposed to things. I've been knocked around enough to realize that when something goes wrong, it's not going to be the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And to say, yeah, I've experienced this before, right? It's okay, it's going to suck, but I've gone through that before. And I've got the coping skills to deal with it. I've got the ability to step up. And, when I accept help from someone else, I realize I feel good about it, right? It doesn't mean I'm weak because someone else had to give me a hand with something, because I'm strong in other places and I help other people in other places and I have a positive impact on the world.
And that really goes back to that curiosity component. If you go into any situation with that curiosity mindset, there's no such thing as failure. You're going to learn from it. And that's how do you develop coping strategies? You can't do it by sitting on the couch. You can't do it by hiding. That's not how they're developed. They're developed by putting your head down and going through those hard things. So that's why that definition of resilience has to have both sides of that equation. Yes, you need the vulnerability and the curiosity, but you also have to be vulnerable and curious enough to go through those hard things in order to develop, in order to grow. Nothing develops from nothing. You have to do something, right?
Yeah, and we see people who have been able to power through adversity. They're strong but fragile often, right? Because they haven't developed that softer side, that ability to have compassion, that ability to accept help when they need it.
Right.
I was working with a group of senior executives and I was talking about benevolence. And I asked them to tell me a story about some time when they had helped someone. And the stories were fantastic. And we went around the room and everyone told a great story about when they'd done something for somebody else or helped someone else thrive. The energy in the room, Kevin, was just buzzing, right? It was incredible. Everyone had these huge grins on their faces. And I said, this is fantastic, right? Just the joy that you've gotten from helping someone else, even years later, you're still experiencing that. Now, if you could just explain why you're so effing selfish. And they stop, they look at me and I said, you just told me how powerful that was. And even years later, you're experiencing that. But you never let anyone have that experience with you. You never ask for help. You never admit you don't know something. Wow. You never admit anything like that, right? You don't reach out to each other. And it was a turning point for that team where they were able to start saying, you know what? There are places where I could use some help, where we overlap and I need your help. And it's one of the challenges that we face as men, more so than women, I think, our inability to be vulnerable, to ask for help when we need it. And that's a big part of being resilient.
That's a very large part. That's really good. I like that perspective. You're preventing other people from experiencing that when you don't ask. That's a really good line. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Can your can your trust building framework be applied to outside of business, like in parenting,
Oh, yeah.
marriage, community leadership? Can you give us some examples there?
Yeah. So one of my students, one of my MBA students in Luxembourg, when I was teaching there, I get all my clients, all my participants to pick a relationship they're going to practice on, right? Because that's how we really learn. And I
Mm.
can explain the model to you, and you'll go, of course, that makes common sense. Feels simple. And then you try to apply it and you go, okay, that was harder than I thought. It's like training a new muscle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's like, I'm going to get this wrong the first few times and I'm going to feel awkward. And once it becomes part of my vocabulary, then it starts to change. And so one of my students chose his sons who were 3 and 5 years old. And he said, I've been away for most of their lives, working out of the country. When I'm around them, it always seems to go wrong. They're afraid of me. I think the relationship is broken forever. Yeah. And he started going through the model, practicing the skills, some coaching. 3 months later, he writes his final report on his work with his kids. And he said, everything's changed. They run to me. They throw themselves on me. They fight over who gets to sit next to me at dinner. It's a complete 180. And I've seen results like that all over the place. We had a client reach out to us. She was head of people. She said, my husband went through your program. He's a different human being. He's a better husband, better father, better friend. He's just a different human being. And I want that for my team. And so, I work with families. Right now, I'm trying to build a program for young men to teach them these skills so that they can be more intentional. It's a skill that we can all build. And so, yeah, we focus in the model remains the same. It's just that how we pull the levers changes. And so I'll give an example of the benevolence lever. One of my students in Luxembourg were sitting around the table, and I said, tell me a relationship that matters to you. Because we're giving examples of how to pull these levers. And he said, my girlfriend. I said, great. Now tell me what matters most to your girlfriend. He said, well, I think her family. I said, okay, so here's what you're going to do tonight. You're going to go home and you're going to say to your girlfriend, I was in class today. My prof asked me about a relationship that really mattered to me. And I said, you. That's step one. You're showing her that she's important, that she matters to you. This is part of how you show that you've got her best interest at heart. Said, then you're going to say to her, he asked me what mattered most to you. And I said, family. Is that right? Now you're giving her the opportunity to correct a misperception or to be involved in the creation of a solution. And I said, when she says yes, you're going to say, then I've decided I'm going to spend more time with your family. I'm going to try to build stronger relationships with your family because it matters to you. And that's how you're going to be transparent and obvious about how you're going to try to be benevolent. Next day he shows up. He's got this huge grin on his face. He said, I'm allowed to talk to you whenever I want. And he said that went incredibly well, right? And so a big part of the work we do is teaching people the 10 levers and then showing them how to pull them and coaching them through how to pull them. And that's true whether it's a parenting relationship, whether it's a spouse and a partner. I know there was a person I was working with who is a therapist, a family therapist. She used the model on a couple they described themselves as circling the drain. They were just sort of going through the motions before they got divorced. And within 3 weeks, they came back to her and they said, we don't really need to be here anymore because we've started having sex again and our relationship's better than it's ever been. But we're scared to stop because things are going so well. And so, yeah, it works on any relationship.
That's very cool. That's awesome. And over the course of the many years that you've been doing this, how has your understanding of trust evolved over those years?
See, that's the thing is when I first started, I built the model and I included things that weren't included. So I included context, which hadn't really been included in the literature. I included vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Once we've made the trust decision, there's this notion of perceived outcomes. And we interpret the world through stories. And so you and I can have the same experience, but have a different perception of what just happened. And so there's a couple more levers involved there in terms of us creating a shared narrative about what just happened. And then that perception of the outcome feeds back into our next interaction. And in the middle of all of this is our emotional states, whether we like or dislike someone else. And that acts as a lens, another story that helps us. We look for confirming evidence. This is why hostile environments are so resilient. Because the literature, 99% of it treats people like they're rational actors. And you've met people, right? We're not always rational. And so a couple more levers there. And so really there was a bunch of stuff in there that hadn't been included before. But as I'm going through and helping people solve problems, I've been learning constantly for the last 20 years. When the Canadian government asked me to help, the military asked me to help them figure out how to build trust with the locals in Afghanistan while we were still there. And I came to realize that context had a huge impact on our perceptions of others. And in fact, early in the relationship, it carries more weight than the individual components, because one guy with a machine gun looks a lot like another guy with a machine gun. And that Canadian patch on your chest really doesn't mean anything to anyone else. And so coming to understand the role that context played in Afghanistan, and the fact that they didn't have the formal mechanisms of control that we take for granted, things like job descriptions, or soldiers saying, "Oh, I can't do that because it's against the rules," and really meaning it. Their context was all around informal things like what religion you belong to, who your family was, who your church head man was, what tribe you belong to, right? So it was all those informal pieces that were really driving the decisions. And over time, you come to learn how to help people pull these levers, how to be more insistent or intentional about having these conversations. Because, first we need to try to understand the other person's perspective, realize that if I'm trying to build trust with you, you're the one who helps me define how to do that. And I actually need to include you in the conversation. There are things that I can do to start the ball rolling, but if I really want to build a deeper relationship, it means I need to talk to you about it.
Have you ever read anything from Chris Voss?
I have.
FBI, former FBI trainer,
he does some
I guess.
Great stuff around vulnerability.
Yeah. So he's negotiated like high end cases, right? So his book is called Never Split the Difference. And what you're saying now really matches up very closely with what he's talking about. Like if you're in a negotiation, like a hostage situation, it's developing that relationship and finding out what they have a perspective of. Like it's not just about you and everybody else. You have to involve them in the process. So when you were just talking that's the first thing that popped up was like, that's a Chris Voss strategy. Like it's really neat to hear that. So
well, and here's the thing is that, the model I developed is really broad and inclusive. And so I lean on people like Chris Voss or Brene Brown or some of those others who've driven really deep spikes in specific areas. And I don't need to be the one who discovered all of this. I'm just providing a framework that people can use to make sense of the world.
Right.
Right. And when I work with people who are more analytical, like I've worked with software companies where you've got programmers who are really gifted technically and really struggle on the personal side. And I've had clients who are somewhere on the spectrum. They'll say to me, "Oh my God, you gave me a formula. And I'm actually able to talk to people now. I can go through the different checklists on the formula and ask the right questions, and it helps me understand people better.
It's a powerful tool, and it's also useful. It's
Right.
and that's the point. That's the point of this podcast, really. I have to give people useful, practical advice. It's not just inspiration. And that's not
Right.
why you're here, right? That's not why you're pursuing this. It's not to inspire others. It's to give them the practical tools that they can go out and use to make a
Yeah.
difference. There has to be a difference. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. My aspiration is to have a positive impact on the world.
Mm,
And, when I look at the struggle that young men are having, I ran a pilot with some of them using the current materials that I have, which are really designed for executives. And it worked, but it could be much better. Right. And so including them in the conversation started to give me insight about how to make a positive impact for them. But the thing that struck me was how badly they wanted to have a positive impact in the world.
mm,
And a lot of times asking them, hey, I want you to practice this, they'd say, oh, I'm not really comfortable. That's kind of outside my wheelhouse. That's a conversation I wouldn't normally have. I don't know how to do that. And we'd problem solve around how to help them do that. But then I'd say to them, I need you to do this so that you can talk to other people who are like you and help them figure out how to do this.
yeah.
And they'd say, oh, if I'm doing it to help someone else, then yes, I will. And so there was just this switch that got flipped, right? And part of what I want to do is help create champions that are able to take this content, which is not rocket science, right? But it takes time to learn and practice and get skillful at,
Mhm.
and help them create ripples in the world that lead to better outcomes.
Do you think altruism is innate in people?
I think not all of us, right? Because we've seen people who are actively trying to destroy trust because it benefits them in the short term.
Okay.
But I think there's a really good piece called Givers and Takers. And I'm losing my memory of the brilliant famous academic who talks about it. But he talks about the fact that there are givers and takers in organizations and in the world. And then the overwhelming majority of people are matchers, right? They'll respond in ways that they're treated. But I think there's a lot more altruism than we are aware of. I think, I've been on a street corner and had a homeless person come up and offer to give me help and clearly feel really good about the fact that they were having a positive impact in someone's life. And,
Yeah.
you know, so we need to be a little less selfish and allow that altruism to come forward. And we need to be a little more welcoming. And, I'm vulnerable all the time. So I guess I get a lot of practice, but it's a skill that we can all build. Right. I go into places, one of the clients I had to serve was, I was working with a group of executives for this company, and they said, well, we'd like you to work with the board of directors for a day. And I said, sure. That'd be great. And then the day before, they called me and they said, by the way, the heads of the two unions are going to be there too. And I said, okay, well, that's going to be a different environment. And they said, yeah, just so you know, we've been in court with each other for the last 5 years and everyone hates everyone.
Wonderful.
And I was like, okay, but I can go into those kinds of environments and feel like it's going to be all right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's partly because I've practiced, right? And it's partly because I've had experience being in difficult environments and coming out the other side And it's never perfect, but it's usually better than people expect.
Usually is.
Yeah.
We had a workout at the gym today. We call it, there's a CrossFit slang. It's called a goat. And a goat is something that, a movement that kicks your butt. And
Okay.
so we specifically program it for things that you suck at, or things that if you saw it beforehand, you would cancel the class because you just don't want to do it. So we
Right.
make a workout specifically to do the things that you are not good at. And
Right.
right, what a great opportunity to get some reps in that you would normally want to naturally avoid. And so if
Right.
you yourself are putting yourself in these difficult conversations or hostile environments, you're just building the reps so that when it comes up again, you're like, no, I've done that before. This is no different, right?
Right.
You just feel at home. You already have the muscle memory built in so that you're good. You're no sweat off your back.
Well, and one of the challenges I think we see in the world, Kevin, is, there's internal versus external locus of control,
Mm-hmm.
right? And internal locus of control means I master my own destiny. I make things happen in the world. External locus of control means that things happen to me. I'm buffeted by the winds of fate. And when I used to talk to my undergraduate students when I was teaching at Duke, um, I'd give them those definitions and I'd say, who here has an internal locus of control? And they're good little capitalists. So all the hands would go up, right?
Yep.
And I'd say, this is awesome. This is so great. This is good news, because that means that if you don't do well in this class, it's not because the test was too hard or I didn't teach it properly. It's all you, baby. And they kind of go, oh, wait a minute. And I'd say, yeah, we tend to have an internal locus of control when we're successful, and
Mm-hmm.
an external locus of control when we fail. And that's healthy to a certain extent. But sometimes people who are struggling with things get it mixed up, right? They take ownership of things they don't have control over, and they give credit to things that they do have control over, but give it credit to the environment. And what we need to do is be curious about that, right? Because I don't control the context, but I do control how I respond. And we can learn, when we're successful, we should take a look and say, what role did I play? But what role did the context play? Because if I become aware of the factors that set me up for success, I can look for those again, right? And increase my chances of being successful.
Observable, measurable, and repeatable.
Right. And when I fail, I mean, my sons were both involved in sports. Their teams never lost a game where the ref didn't suck. And so when I fail, I need to be able to take a look and say, what role did I play? How could I have done things differently so that I'm better prepared next time? Or what role did the context play, and how do I keep a heads up for that happening again? Right? So that I can see it coming. What do I learn from this experience? Because a hard road can be a good teacher if we let it.
I have a poster in my office. Smooth seas never made a skilled sailor.
Right.
It's true. You got to go
It's-
through the rough shit sometimes, and that's okay. But you got to keep your eyes open. And that again goes back to that curiosity mindset. If you're going into any situation with curiosity, you're going to learn. You're going to win. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I learned eventually as a parent was that I needed to stop. I had gone through enough experiences. I was good enough at predicting people's behavior that I could see challenges coming for my kids. And I developed the terrible habit of saying, look out, there's a rake. You're going to step on a rake. It's going to pop you in the nose. You're going to feel it. And then I realized that all my kids were learning was dad knows where the rakes are.
Mm.
And so instead, I started stepping back and saying, oh, you just stepped on a rake. Looked like it hurt. What could we have done to prevent that? What were the signals that that rake was coming? More of a coach approach, right? Getting curious with them.
Yep.
and then saying, how do we handle that? How do we respond now? I'd go on trips with my sons, and I'd realize that I've traveled enough that I've got all these coping strategies that I wasn't even aware of, right? And I'm on a trip with my son, and I realize I'm driving all the time. He's just not literally, legally blind. I don't drive much anymore. But I'm making the decisions and I'm leading the way and all this kind of stuff. And I just took a very conscious effort to stop and start turning to him and saying, where are we going? What's the plan? You lead the way. And it gave him a chance to learn while I was there as a safety net.
Mm-hmm.
And now he travels all over the place on his own, and he's incredibly comfortable because he's learned those skills while he had someone alongside who had more experience than he did.
That's awesome. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Darryl, this has been a very insightful conversation. And as I mentioned earlier, I always ask my guests for their own personal definition of resiliency. So in your own words, how would you define that?
Yeah. I think resilience is a learned set of skills for coping with what life puts on us. And in my case, resilience was trying to find meaning. I have a belief in God. I'm not real comfortable with organized religion.
Mm.
And when I was going through my struggles and my challenges, I believed it was God preparing me for challenges that were coming down the road. And so I think curiosity is at the heart of this. It's, wondering what I can learn from this because it's happened, right? Whatever's happened has already happened. And so understanding how we can dust ourselves off, get back up, what help we need, how do we ask for it? How do we take the next step? That's what resilience looks like for me.
That's excellent. And Darryl, you have a book. Tell us about it.
I do. Yeah. So the book is called Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World. And I wrote it because I was having huge impact with individuals. And it felt like I was dropping grains of sand in the ocean. And the book was intended so that if I go away, what I know doesn't. And so it's filled with stories, and it's written in a way that real people can understand it and read it. The intent is to share the model as broadly as possible with folks. And there's the full model is laid out in there, as are, chapter 5 is the model and an explanation of it. Chapter 6 is how you actually pull the levers, right? Very cool. It's a how-to guide for how to practice some of these skills. So it's intended to be practical and applied, and I've been told it's a good read. Yeah.
It's awesome. We'll definitely put a link in our show notes here. So if anybody's interested, they can definitely just click through and make it as easy as possible.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Kevin.
Darryl, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we sign off for today?
Trust is a skill we can all build. We need to be more intentional about it now than we've ever been. And so feel free to check out my website. There's free content there that you can look at. And share the concepts with a friend.
Beautiful. Darryl, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight. This has been amazing, amazing conversation, and wishing you all the best.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest episodes, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.